Welcome to the show. My name is Tony Cola with Push Liberty, and you're watching the Push Liberty Show. Today we're going to be talking about the wars. More specifically, the wars in relation to immigration. So I'm going to pull this up here. Jump right into it. Here is an article by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, or FAIR.org. Precise and surgical. NBC's bombing claims lack verification. This is from March 26th of 2003. And watch this. The Pentagon can be expected to claim that its bombing campaign against Iraq is accurate, but without independent verification. Reporters should be skeptical about these claims about precision bombing. Recent reports on NBC News illustrate the opposite tendency. Correspondent Bob Faw described the Florida town as a community which very much endorses that surgical strike against Saddam Hussein. Anchor Katie Couric also referred to, quote, a series of surgical strikes focusing on Iraq's key leadership, end quote, during the first two nights of bombing. Anchor Matt Lauer, sexual predator, agreed, quote, the people in that city have endured 2 nights of surgical airstrike, and they have no idea what could come tonight. Pentagon correspondent Jim, whatever the fuck that says, took it a step further, reporting that, quote, every weapon is precision guided, deadly accuracy designed to kill only the targets, not innocent civilians. On the Today Show, the next morning, whatever the fuck, reiterated his point, quote, more than 1,000 bombs and missiles were dropped on Baghdad, 3 times the number from the entire Gulf War, and this time they're all precision guided, deadly accurate, designed to kill only targets, not innocent civilians. So if you notice, they keep talking about how they don't kill innocent civilians. You want to see these precision target weapons? Here they are. Here's target weapons. Give me 1 second. I have to grab my headphones. Okay. I'm going to play this for now without audio while I set up my headphones. Okay. Let's see. There they are in the sky right now. Full screen this. These precision bombs. This is in 2003. How precise they are. No civilians dead there, right? As you can see, it's completely precision targeted. This was in 2003 when we attacked Iraq in response to I don't know what. And here is Iraqi refugees. Okay. In 2003, the 2003 U.S. invasion, right here, this is where I'm reading, displaced approximately 1 in 25 Iraqis from their homes, with fighting connected with the Islamic State contributing to additional displacement. The war has brought increased rates of illness and disease to Iraq while displacing the very medical professionals who could have treated the sick. Lack of access to sanitation, clean drinking water, all that other stuff. So, this is in 2003, the U.S. invasion in Iraq, and their so-called precision bombing. Deadly accuracy designed to kill only the targets, not innocent civilians. Obviously, innocent civilians were killed in that. And the issue I have with this is that I hear a lot of people complaining about immigration, and I think they should be going to the root of the issue. The root of the issue has to do with our war, or our global war overseas, in Iraq, Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Libya, and soon Iran. Here is an Operation Timber Sycamore. Timber Sycamore was a classified weapons supply and training program run by the United States Central Intelligence Agency and supported by some Arab intelligence services such as the Security Service in Saudi Arabia. Launched in 2012 or 2013, it supplied money, weaponry, and training to rebel forces, really terrorists, fighting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the Syrian civil war. According to U.S. officials, the program was run by the CIA's Special Activities Division and has trained thousands of rebels. President Barack Obama secretly authorized the CIA to begin arming Syria's embattled rebels in 2013. The program's existence was suspended after the U.S. Federal Business Opportunities website publicly solicited contract bids to ship tons of weaponry from Eastern Europe to, don't know how to pronounce that, Turkey, and that Jordan. I don't know how to pronounce half these fucking countries. One consequence of the program has been the flood of U.S. weapons, including assault rifles, mortars, and rocket-propelled grenades into the Middle East black market. So, assault rifles, mortars, and rocket-propelled grenades into what they say is the Middle East black market, but what is really into terrorist hands. Here is Barack Obama with Joe Biden standing next to him, just being Joe Biden, seeking military action in Syria. This is August 31st, 2013, posted by CNN.
And all of this corroborates what the world can plainly see. Hospitals overflowing with victims. 10 days ago, the world watched in horror as men, women, and children were massacred in Syria in the worst chemical weapons attack of the 21st century. Yesterday, the United States presented a powerful case that the Syrian government was responsible for this attack on its own people. Our intelligence.
So this is what he used to justify going into Syria, or wanting to go into Syria. Here's an article from CNN, June 14th, 2012. This is before Obama said this. Before the gas attack that initiated us going in Syria. U.S. military completes initial planning for Syria. The U.S. military has completed its own planning for how American troops would conduct a variety of operations against Syria or to assist neighboring countries in the event action was ordered. In recent weeks, the Pentagon has finalized its assessment of what types of units would be needed, how many troops, and even the cost of certain potential operations. So they got very specific with the planning of this before anything really even happened. The planning comes as the U.S. has become increasingly concerned that the violence in Syria is verging on civil war. General Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said the recent series of bombings have heightened the worry. Okay. Here's another article talking about Operation Timber Sycamore. Timber Sycamore and Washington's secret war in Syria. This says in 2013. This says launched in 2012 or 13. So it kind of begs the question of whether, like this article indicates, in 2012, the U.S. military completing initial planning for Syria, whether that involves Operation Timber Sycamore, which involved us training terrorists. Plain and simple. Here are the numbers of Syrian refugees from March 2012 to August 2015. You see how that number goes up? Right after we started invading Syria, arming rebels. You see how that number goes up? Very clear. This chart is very clear. This starts in 2012, March 2012 to be specific, ends in August 2015. You can see clearly the numbers are going up. Obviously in relation to the Syrian civil war and our involvement. So here's a guy on MSNBC, to my surprise, honestly. I didn't expect someone like this to be on NBC in the first place. Here's something someone says regarding that. And here's someone actually telling the truth about the wars on a mainstream media platform. Now keep in mind, he's not an anchor or anything, because why would MSNBC hire someone like this?
And we know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia.
So as you can see, he just said that this operation brought in terrorist groups into Syria, Operation Timber Sycamore, which he's going to bring up the name soon. But listen to what he says again.
The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia. So we have been digging deeper and deeper and deeper.
And when you really think about the reason a lot of people don't want to pull out of the wars is because they think Russia will have control of Syria after. Our involvement in Syria is the reason why Russia went to Syria in the first place. Our involvement in 2012 and 2013, our alliance with Saudi Arabia in the CIA to go into Syria and fund terrorist groups to take down Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria.
Deeper. What we should do now is get out and not continue to throw missiles, not have a confrontation with Russia. 7 years has been a disaster.
And again, this has a direct correlation with the number of Syrian refugees coming in from Syria. We wouldn't have a problem with immigration, at least from the Middle East, if we weren't over there bombing them. And that seems pretty simple to me, but a lot of people find it a little more complicated for some reason.
Under Obama, continuing under Trump. This is what I would call the permanent state. This is the CIA, this is Pentagon, wanting to keep Iran and Russia out of Syria, but no way to do that. And so we have made a proxy war in Syria. It's killed 500,000 people, displaced 10 million, and I'll say predictably so, because I predicted it 7 years ago that there was no way to do this and that it would make a complete chaos. So what I would plead to President Trump is get out. Like his instinct told him, by the way.
Before, yeah.
That was his instinct. But then all the establishment, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pentagon, everybody said, no, that's irresponsible. But his instinct is right. Get out. We've done enough damage, 7 years. And now we really risk.
So for anyone that's wondering why we have so many refugees coming to the United States, maybe it's because Obama bombed the shit out of the Middle East for the past 8 years or at least for the 8 years in his presidency. And Trump is continuing to do so.
A confrontation with Russia that is extraordinarily dangerous, reckless.
Professor Sachs is correct to say this is a massive humanitarian disaster. I think the numbers are actually 600,000 dead and 14 million displaced. So I'm in complete agreement with him on the scale of this, but I would like to see the United States try and be part of the solution.
I don't think it's attractive, but I think we have to understand how this happened. This happened because
this guy just said he'd like to see the United States as part of the solution. Still, after all these years of failure, he still wants to see us as part of the solution. And part of that solution that he talks about is basically like sending a toddler, a little baby, to do dishes. And he just smashes all the dishes. And saying, you know what we need to do? Send that baby in again to do those dishes. That's literally what he's saying.
of us. These 600,000 are not just incidental. We started a war to overthrow a regime. It was covert. It was Timber Sycamore. People can look it up, the CIA operation, together with Saudi Arabia. Still it's shrouded in secrecy, which is part of the problem in our country. A major war.
You ever wonder why the media wouldn't report on this, but they report so much on the horrible crimes of Bashar al-Assad? Because the media wants to go to war. They want regime change. They don't care about refugees because they're the ones promoting the war that's displacing them in the first place.
War effort, shrouded in secrecy, never debated by Congress, never explained to the American people, signed by President Obama, never explained. And this created chaos. And so just throwing more missiles in right now is not a response.
My only concern...
We need to go, it's, by the way, not to walk away, to go to the UN Security Council, as the Admiral says, to agree with Russia on a strategy for ending the fight. But ending the fight means that we stop trying to overthrow a government, that we stop trying to support rebels who are committed to overthrowing the government. That is where this war continues, because we, to this day, back rebels that are trying to overthrow a government contrary to international law, contrary to the UN Charter, contrary to common sense, contrary to practical path. We can't do it. And it's just creating ongoing crisis to the extent of facing an imminent confrontation with Russia.
But for all these people warning us about Russia, they sure are bringing us closer to war with them. Here's an article by the Huffington Post, which actually surprised me. This is from 2017, and they say the Obama administration should be found guilty of war crimes in Yemen. And why is America in Yemen? Look at Operation Timber Sycamore. Who are we in an alliance with? Saudi Arabia. We're in alliance with Saudi Arabia. And that's not just in the case of Syria, but Yemen as well. Those of us who supported Barack Obama in 2008 in the hope that he was a man of peace must face the painful reality. We were dead wrong. Nowhere is our folly better illustrated than in the ongoing human rights catastrophe now unfolding in Yemen with critical U.S. assistance. For months, those who bothered to care about Yemen, one of the poorest countries on earth, have been criticizing Barack Obama for aiding and abetting the Saudi coalition assault on that country. As Foreign Policy reported back in October, Obama was already being accused of committing war crimes through his logistical assistance to the brutal Saudi air offensive against Yemen. Yet, undeterred, Obama doubled down on his crimes in November by approving the sale of $1.29 billion in smart bombs to Saudi Arabia to kill people in Yemen. A sale which, among other things, is intended to replenish Saudi Arabia's arsenal in attacking Yemen. Of course, as always, the U.S. mainstream media, which is in the most sorry state I've ever witnessed it, has been ready to lend a hand to Obama's crimes by 1, barely reporting on Yemen, and 2, reporting Yemen as a more or less equal battle between Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition. To be clear, this is not an equal fight, for it is the Saudis who are inflicting the disproportionate share of civilian casualties through a U.S.-backed air campaign against a country with no air defenses. The toll on Yemen's civilian population from the U.S.-backed conflict is great, with Human Rights Watch reporting back in October. The war, and particularly the numerous coalition airstrikes, has taken a terrible toll on civilians. As of late September, the UN had documented that the war had killed 2,355 civilians and wounded 4,862, the majority in coalition airstrikes. 2,355 civilians. That's kind of similar to the number of civilians killed in 9/11, right? Did they have anything to do with the Houthi rebels in Iran? No. They're just in the way. Now, here are U.S. bombs dropped in 2016. In Syria, 12,192. In Iraq, 12,095. In Afghanistan, 1,337. In Libya, 496. In Yemen, 34. In Somalia, 14. And in Pakistan, 3. So these 7 countries we've been dropping bombs in. Somalia and Libya being in Africa, the rest in the Middle East. Here's a report from The Guardian. America dropped 26,171 bombs in 2016. What a bloody end to Obama's reign. According to new figures, the U.S. dropped nearly 3 bombs every hour, 24 hours a day. Dare we think how Donald Trump will continue this legacy? And he has. This is also another report from during that same year, 2016. The U.S. is dropping bombs quicker than it can make them. 26,171 bombs dropped in 2016. We ran out. U.S. drone strikes have gone up 432% since Trump took office. And now look at some of these stats. The Nobel Peace Prize winning head of state, Barack Obama, he won a Nobel Peace Prize and murdered thousands of people in the Middle East and Africa. The Nobel Peace Prize winning head of state ordered 10 times more drone strikes than the previous president, Bush. And estimates late in Obama's presidency showed 49 out of 50 victims were civilians. Really think about that number. 49 out of 50. The ratio on that is outrageous. That's mostly civilians. That means one terrorist for every 50 targets. In 2015, it was reported that up to 90% of drone casualties were not the intended targets. Current President Donald Trump campaigned on a less interventionist foreign policy, claiming to be opposed to the nation building and misguided invasions. But less than 2 months into his presidency, Trump has expanded the drone strikes that plagued Obama's peaceful presidency. So Trump's drone strikes go up 432% since Obama. Not a step up, is it? After he campaigned on pulling out of the wars. U.S. military, this is from The Guardian. U.S. military members could be prosecuted for war crimes in Yemen. Congressman Ted Lieu, a former Air Force lawyer, says members of U.S. armed services could be prosecuted for providing support for Saudi-led coalition. Now, I doubt this actually happened because I haven't heard of anyone actually being prosecuted for this. But members of the U.S. Armed Services could be prosecuted for war crimes for providing mid-air refueling and other military support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. So while the Saudi airplanes are bombing innocent people in Yemen, we're giving them mid-air refuels. Nearly 4,000 Yemeni civilians have been killed. I don't know how to pronounce that. Have been killed since the conflict began in earnest in March 2015 after Houthi rebels seized Sana'a. The war has pitted Saudi Arabia, which supports the government of President, I don't know how to pronounce these people's names, man, against Iran, which backs the Houthis. So here we are, helping two countries kill a bunch of innocent people. Now I'm just going to play this video. It has some interesting clips and facts in it. Here.
Viewed General Clark on
picture.
Tuesday at the 92nd Street Y in New York. Now let's talk about Iran. You have a whole website devoted to stopping war.
www.stopiranwar.com.
This is a general. General Wesley Clark reveals Middle East invasion was pre-planned and Iran is next. So why is America supporting Saudi Arabia so much? Why is America supporting Saudi Arabia bombing the Houthi rebels that Iran backs and killing a bunch of innocent people along the way? Here's the reason why.
Do you see a replay of what happened in the lead up to the war with Iraq? The allegations of the weapons of mass destruction, the media leaping on to the bandwagon.
And if you notice, for the war in Iran that so much of the media and so many people in the State Department are trying to push for, the excuse they're using is that Iran is building weapons of mass destruction. Similar to the lie that got us in to the war in Iraq. Completely based on lies. All the information was fabricated. People like Bush pushed it. People like Robert Mueller. People like James Comey. All pushed the narrative that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And all of those things were lies.
Well, in a way, but you know, history doesn't repeat itself exactly twice. What I did warn about when I testified in front of Congress in 2002, I said, if you want to worry about a state, it shouldn't be Iraq, it should be Iran. But this government, our administration, wanted to worry about Iraq, not Iran. I knew why, because I'd been through the Pentagon right after 9/11. About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why?
The 20th of September. So 9 days after 9/11, they already decided they were going to war with Iraq, even though evidence pointed to Saudi Arabian knowledge of the attacks and Israeli knowledge of the attacks. And who are we helping in the Middle East right now? The Saudis. We attacked Iraq. And we're helping the Saudis. Why are we helping the people that perpetrated this attack on Americans? Why are we helping the people that perpetrated 9/11, that planned 9/11? Most of the people involved in the attack were Saudi Arabian. And this is a fact. You can look this up yourself.
He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said,
Do those countries sound familiar? He'll repeat those countries again.
is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, you remember that? He said, sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you.
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again.
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran.
Okay, and this is showing an article that Bush lied about weapons of mass destruction. But keep in mind the countries he listed. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan. Pakistan wasn't on that list that he listed, but Iran is. And what is the mainstream media pushing for? War with Iran. All these excuses that we should go to war with Iran. And every time Trump tries to pull out of these wars, it always happens. Something new comes up. A chemical gas attack in Syria by the evil Bashar al-Assad. When in reality, do you remember that chemical gas attack that made Trump launch 69 Tomahawk missiles? That was actually perpetrated by the same rebels that we funded in Operation Timber Sycamore. And that was proven in a report, or at least a leak from a report. They left out that specific part when they released the report. But once it was leaked, people found out that the entire thing was a lie and that it wasn't dropped from airplanes but placed by terrorists and triggered. So it wasn't Bashar al-Assad that did all of that. Meanwhile, look how many bombs we dropped in Syria because of chemical weapons in 2012, 2013, and chemical weapons attacks in 2016 or 17, whenever that happened. All a lie. So, it's interesting to me how the same countries this guy listed was on that list, the 7 countries. Almost every single one is on here besides Iran, 6 out of the 7. And Iran is obviously next based on the narrative that the mainstream media is pushing. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia. We got most of them. Now keep in mind, when Barack Obama assumed his presidency, we were only in 2 wars, and he expanded them to 7. 7 wars, 2 wars to 7. And you just saw the list of countries that included. But Iran is next on the list, according to this general that saw the documentation for himself in the Pentagon. Colin Powell's presentation to the United Nations Security Council yesterday. It is hard to imagine how anyone could doubt that Iraq possesses weapons of mass destruction. This is the Washington Post. The Washington Post, who's promoted every single war in American history. Well, at least since they've been around. It is hard to imagine how anyone could doubt that Iraq possesses weapons of mass destruction. This is what he said. And did Iraq possess weapons of mass destruction? No, they didn't have any. But we found out after that we invaded him that the so-called intelligence that attack was based on was all based on a lie. I'm actually going to keep playing this. George Bush says, God told me to end the tyranny in Iraq. God told Bush to do this. That's what he's saying. Now, I can't tell if he honestly believes this or it's just something he's saying to make the religious fanatics just fall in line.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
So funny, Bush.
Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
U.S. secretly backed Syrian opposition groups, cables released by WikiLeaks show. What year was that in? 2011. This is before Operation Timber Sycamore even took place, or at least was documented to have taken place. So here is an article saying that the U.S. secretly backed Syrian opposition groups based on information from the WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks, nobody to this day has proven any of the leaks coming from WikiLeaks to be lies. All of them are true. The only problem with WikiLeaks, though, is that he's telling the truth about war criminals. He's reporting on crimes. So he needs to go, right? Now this is in 2017 when Trump launched the 69 Tomahawk missiles in Syria. Here's what reporter Brian Williams said from MSNBC. I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons in praise, and that's what he said, in praise of Raytheon's Tomahawk missiles hitting the Syrian army. This guy almost came his pants when he saw this happening. I think it's about to show the clip.
Go into greater detail. We see these beautiful pictures at night from the decks of these two U.S. Navy vessels in the eastern Mediterranean. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons. And they are beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments making what is for them a brief flight over to this airfield. What did they hit? What are you convinced?
I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons. And I think you can say the same for most of the mainstream media, because they've been promoting these wars for so long. U.S. stepping up Lebanon evacuation. Hundreds of evacuees arrive early Thursday in Cyprus. United States brought in more sea and air assets to widen the bottleneck, keeping thousands of Americans in war-torn Lebanon on Wednesday, a week after violence erupted. About 1,200 U.S. citizens left Beirut for Cyprus on Wednesday, the State Department and military said. That tally is a significant jump from the 450 or so who had earlier managed to flee the fighting that broke out between Israel and Hezbollah militants July 12th. Libya in chaos since the 2011 overthrow of Gaddafi. And the 2011 overthrow of Gaddafi falls perfectly in line with the plan that the general was speaking about earlier. Secret war. The U.S. has conducted 550 drone strikes in Libya since 2011, more than in Somalia, Yemen, or Pakistan. And here's a clip of Hillary Clinton.
That is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
We came, we saw, he died. That's what she had to say about Gaddafi. And after Gaddafi was overthrown, he had even given up his weapons at the request of the United States. And after he gave up his weapons, the United States still attacked him. The United States, well, we didn't attack him. We allowed the rebels to take him down after he was disarmed. And that was her comment. Militants and civilians killed in multiple U.S. Somalia airstrikes. Who even knew we were in Somalia? U.S. Marines poised to enter South Sudan. Why are we in Africa? And it just begs the question, again, all these bombs we're dropping on the Middle East, don't you think that this might have something to do with the influx of immigration, refugees? The problem with the refugee crisis is that we are bombing the shit out of the Middle East and creating refugees. And here's a tweet by Trump, but here is the next clip. This is a former New York Times journalist who was fired for his anti-war views. And here's what he said about it.
And then the trash talk radio was just, the Wall Street Journal even wrote an editorial denouncing me.
What?
Yeah. As, I don't know, a left-wing pacifist something. It was ridiculous. So the Times' hand was forced.
Oh, really?
To respond. There was a lot of public pressure. And so they called me in and issued me a written reprimand. I mean, they called me in to give it to me. It was kind of like the Vatican or something, and for impugning the impartiality of the New York Times by attacking the calls to invade Iraq. And under guild rules, you give the employee the reprimand, and then if they keep...
So he didn't fall in line. He was attacking the narrative that we have to invade Iraq, when really we didn't. They didn't have weapons of mass destruction, as was proven later.
Violating it, that's grounds for firing them. So they were just setting me up to kick me out.
And so you had a choice to either stop telling the truth about the Iraq War and keep your job, right? Or keep telling the truth about it and lose your job.
Right.
And so that's a big deal. You walked away from the New York Times.
It is a big deal, and I don't want to pretend that it was easy. And, I was in there.
I wouldn't do it.
My hands were sweating. I mean, I'm not going to pretend it was an easy decision. I mean, I knew what I had to do, but I don't want to make light of it.
So the New York Times fired this guy for telling the truth about the war in Iraq. And you ever wonder why the media has such a pro-war narrative? Because they fire people that deviate from the narrative. Despite Obama's new executive order, U.S. drone policy may still violate international law. Okay, so on July 1st, the White House announced 3 main changes to how the United States will use drone strikes against terrorist suspects. In 2013, President Obama promised to bring greater transparency to U.S. drone policy, as well as stronger safeguards. You know why Obama promised to bring greater transparency to the drone policy? Because Obama's press secretary was caught. This is his press secretary saying, "I was told not to acknowledge existence of drone program." He was instructed not to acknowledge the administration's use of drones. When I went through the process of becoming press secretary, one of the first things they told me, why is it the first thing they tell them? Because the war is such an important part of their plan. One of the first things they told me was, you're not even to acknowledge the drone program. Gibbs said on MSNBC's Up with Chris Hayes on Sunday, you're not even to discuss that it exists. So this is why Obama wants to bring greater transparency to the drone program. Meanwhile, his drone strikes had 90% casualties. 49 out of 50 victims were civilians. In 2015, it was reported that up to 90% of drone casualties were not the intended targets. 90%. That's most. Almost all. 49 out of 50 victims were civilians. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. Barack Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize at the same time as bombing and killing thousands of innocent people. And this is what the war on terror is really about. This is what it's really about. Including the countries like Somalia, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, the 7 countries that were listed earlier. This is why they're pushing the global war on terror so often.
They say it comes from their so-called war on terror. A war in which they converted a criminal act, terrorism, which is listed in the U.S. Code as a crime, which is why they've prosecuted people for terrorism for eons. But simply through their announcement that this crime was now converted into an act of war, they say that gave them these omnipotent powers. And they have emphasized from the get-go that this is a global war on terror. It's not just limited to Yemen and Pakistan or Africa or Latin America or Europe, that the entire world is the battlefield. And in that message is that right here in the United States, which they say is the primary target of the terrorists, this global war on terror encompasses. A few years ago, they took an American into custody. They turned him over to the military. When he said, "I want a lawyer," they said, "You don't get no lawyer. This is America. You're an enemy of this country. You don't get a trial either, because we have the authority to hold you for the rest of your life under a life sentence with no trial."
This is the reality of the global war on terror. What came of the war in Iraq after 9/11, the war in Afghanistan, and the war in Syria? The Patriot Act. The Patriot Act allows them to arrest any American indefinitely. Any American. As so long as they label you a terrorist.
Because you're an enemy. And we get to make that determination in this new world order. They tortured him using techniques that the CIA and the military had acquired from the North Korean communists, who had used them so effectively against American prisoners of war, turning their minds into mush and making them confess to crimes they had never committed. Sensory deprivation, goggles, sound suppressors, isolation, what they call touchless torture. But what was most important about this was not just that particular case, but the message that was sent to every American. We not only have the authority to do this to this man, we have the authority to do this to every American. And this mindset was reflected when they assassinated an American traveling in Yemen several years ago, post 9/11, traveling in a car where they just took him out. This mindset was reflected most recently in the case of the alleged Detroit bomber, where the statists, both liberals and conservatives, were saying, "Turn him over to the military. He's an enemy. He's caught on the battlefield here in the United States. Torture him. Do whatever's necessary to make him talk." In other words, what the statists did to Randy Weaver's wife when they put that bullet right into her forehead as she held her baby and was unarmed at Ruby Ridge, Idaho. What they did to Randy Weaver's son when they shot him in the back. Indeed, what they did to those Branch Davidians at Waco when they injected that flammable gas into that building that had all those children in it, and then bulldozed the entire site so that there could not be an investigation. They can now do legally and with impunity to anyone they want, as long as they label him a terrorist.
And that is the truth. The reason We have so much immigration. The reason we're having such a big issue with refugees, 2012, 2013, this is just Syrian refugees. This is not including Iraqi refugees. This is not including refugees from Afghanistan. This is not including refugees from Africa. This is just Syrian. 2012 and in 2013, when our involvement began in Syria, the number of Syrian refugees skyrocketed. This is not normal. This is not something that just happens. This is something that was triggered by our involvement. So, this seems like a good place to end it off. I just want to say thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to Push Liberty on YouTube. Follow Push Liberty on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, any social media. You can also find me on BitChute as well as DLive. And thanks for watching.